to 11. I'm kind of continuing a little bit, picking up only on one point which Pastor Joshua preached last Sunday when he was talking about shining through suffering. And I thought that is one of the greatest testimony a Christian can give to the world, who think that it's not relevant anymore. The Bible is not relevant anymore. Last week he seems to be telling us on an individual basis to shine through suffering. Today, as we read this text and as I come and I share with you, I want to share it from the perspective of the church as a body, how we shine through suffering. Alright, so if you are at 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 to 12. Let me give you a little bit of background, or just refresh your memory, because Pastor Joshua did say that also, to us the background. The church, at this moment when Peter decided to write this letter, the church was undergoing persecution, particularly under the Roman Emperor Nero. So they were being persecuted and they were being tested severely for their faith. A result of that, of course, some were shaken, and Peter started to write at the churches in Turkey. Some churches were already scattered and some believers were also all scattered. So it is in times of this that Peter wrote to encourage the church, reminding them of their purpose, reminding them what they need to do as he concludes this part of the letter. One of the things I realized is that to shine through suffering or to go through the difficult times as a church, you need good leadership. You definitely need good spiritual leadership. And you will find that that is why Peter wrote and he spoke to the elders first. Not only about good leadership, they need a flock that can understand the role of the leaders and the flock to respond in the right way. So Peter also wrote to the church and to the flock as a general way, encouraging them to remain united. While the leaders do their duties, their roles, the flock will support and show how they appreciate their leaders. So in 1 Peter chapter 5, I'm going to ask the ladies to read from verse 1 to 5, and then from 6 to 11, will the men read it after the lady has finished. Ladies, chapter 5, 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 to 5. Are you ready? 1, 2, go. That's the reading of God's word regarding this passage. Peter starts by first speaking to the elders. And the elders here, you can take it to mean pastors and spiritual leaders. You also can take it to mean, generally at that time, it's only the older one who are appointed to be the elders of the church. So he was speaking to the pastors and leaders. Now we have been using the word shepherd very commonly and everything, and we think in terms of shepherd as a pastor and all that. That is what I want you to keep in mind, that shepherds, or you call pastors, are actually spiritual leaders. Then as Peter writes this to the church, he didn't come. I want you to notice first also, he came in a form as he writes to encourage them, not as I am better than you. You need to understand the humility as he writes that. Because when he speaks to the younger, he said, I want the younger to be humble. We might think Peter is very, very arrogant already, or he's thinking that he's better than them. In verse 1, he says, I appeal to you as a fellow elder. That's humility. He's appealing. He's not commanding. He's not just saying, I am better than you, I am your senior. He is saying, I am your co-worker together. It is a teamwork kind of things. And then he addressed the role of a shepherd, or the role of a spiritual leader. What are the roles of a spiritual leader? If we don't understand that, we will lose track. And we will have wrong expectations. And wrong expectations usually lead to discouragement, and very often also, dissension. The role of a spiritual leader, he reminds them, he says, you got to do your duty, because these are times of suffering, these are times of God's coming soon. And these are times of persecution, but you need to carry on your role. And the first thing he says is, you are to shepherd. Verse 2, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care. Our thinking, very often we think of shepherd as a person and as a position. But when Peter wrote that, he was talking about the work that needs to be done. He's talking about shepherding. A better way to put it is, shepherd the flock that is under your care. And as you read on, I think today we need to start by reminding ourselves, spiritual leaders and pastors and all of us who aspire to lead people and all that, shepherding is never based upon status, but upon stewardship. Look at verse 2. He said, be shepherds of God's flock. He didn't say be shepherd of the flock, or be shepherd of the church or the congregation. He said, be shepherd of God's flock. The flock don't belong to us, don't belong to the leaders. The call is to shepherd the people. And the word flock, when it says God's flock, what touches me is, by using the word God's flock, when Peter wrote like that, it's not demeaning. It's like shepherd is here, flock is below. Or shepherd is the wise one, the flock are the dumb ones. We always say sheep are dumb, for example, and everything. But not in this case here. When he used the word God's flock, he is actually emphasizing how precious the flock is to God. How important the flock is to God. He's reminding the leaders there, he says, you shepherd them because this flock is my flock and they are important and they are very precious to me. And then he says, you have to oversee that. I'm talking about the man. I'm not talking about position, if you like to call it. He says you are to shepherd. You are to be a steward. You are an overseer. You are an overseer. Or a better word in our modern day, a caretaker. You have to take care of this flock that has been entrusted to you. the flock that is very important and very precious to me. You should show care, you should show concern, especially in these difficult times. You should know, after I will explain to you about their health, the status that they are in. Because there are some that is already scattered all around. Exercise great care for them because they are under your care. You are a caretaker. You know what about a caretaker? You know, sometimes we have places that is like bungalows, big bungalows, and you have a caretaker. The caretaker don't own the place. He takes care. But you see, something interesting about a caretaker is very often he does it as a job. He tries to keep the place clean and everything in order. And he does it because he is paid to do it. I'm using this as an example that shepherding God's flock does not start with a responsibility like a caretaker. Shepherding God's flock starts with a love relationship, an intimate love relationship with God. When the person knows, when the spiritual leaders know, when the pastors know, when the church leaders know the heart of God, what He wants, what is His desire, and what is on His mind, they will do it willingly. And they will do it almost what we call spontaneously, without even having to be told. And that's the best kind of caretaker you have. A caretaker that takes care of the place because he knows what the master likes and how things to be in place, and doesn't do it for the money anymore. Does it to please the master. Now I share this because sometimes we start from the point of responsibility. We say it's a responsibility and we do it. So we do it out of responsibility, not out of a relationship of God. And in the New Testament, it clearly tells us. It says, then when trouble comes, they will run away because they are just hireling. They are working for money. Now, I know none of us work for money, but the key word here is, he used the word eager to do it. So you can only be eager if you take the thing as the master himself is doing. The eagerness to do cannot be out of a responsibility, but the eagerness to do it can only come out of a love for the master. And he says, not as one who is forced. Not as one who is forced. So he's checking on the quality of the leaders. He is reminding them, hey, you are people whom I have divinely appointed. Take care of them, not because you have been forced into it. Not because of circumstances. Not because situation is so bad, you just got to stand in. Nobody is shepherding. Then we are doing it out of a responsibility. It clearly what Peter is trying to write is that your calling is a divine calling. It's not just a calling by human resources, human effort. You are called by God, and that calling can come about only when we have an intimate, real, and continuous relationship with God. And we love Him so much, we know He loves the flock. The flock is precious to Him. The flock is important to Him. We do it eagerly, not for money, not for gains, or anything else. It is born out of a divine calling. Shepherding is born out of a divine calling. Out of a divine calling because it comes out of an intimate relationship with God. Other than this, then it's not a divine calling. Other than this, unless that intimate relationship exists with God, that close intimate relationship and the love of God, then you do it. Other than that, it is just something else. It might be good, but it is something else. You know, I use this passage very often, and I sometimes ask, I said, did God call you? He said, but I'm willing, what? I'm willing to do it. Nobody is forcing it to me. And then after that, they tell me, but, you know, nobody is doing it, and therefore I'm willing to do it, and therefore I do it. That's not a divine calling. That's fulfilling a responsibility. That's a good Christian. That's a good reason to do it. But it's not a divine calling. Shepherding. This is why when you read later on, Peter just write very simply, submit, humble yourself. Because it's a divine calling. We have difficulties in submitting and humbling if we do not see this part, that it comes out of a divine calling, an intimate relationship. If it's sourced in man, if it's sourced out of a sense of responsibility, not a relationship, then it's not a divine calling. And you know what? Even the person who does it will somehow along the way feel not so eager to do it. You will hear yourself say, I have to do it. I got no choice. You won't dare tell anybody. You will tell yourself, say, nobody is doing it. I think I got to do it. Otherwise, what's going to happen to the body? You will hear that saying yourself. But when there is a divine calling, because of that love relationship, when it's real and it's continuous, you want to please the master, you will do it and you will keep doing it. That's the man that God calls to a leader. That's the man that God calls to shepherd. A relationship that results in the fulfilling of the responsibility. Let me give you one simple illustration. We who have been serving very long, we who have been in church doing any area you serve, don't just think about the leaders. We need to be very careful. I checked myself one of the days, and I realized I be very careful. We are serving out of a relationship, or we are serving out of a responsibility. It's very different. I serve because I love God, or I serve to show that I love God. It's very different. Although the work comes out the same, but the attitude towards it is very different. Example, when Molly and myself, when we get married, alright, the early days, the love is very strong. Not that the love is not strong now, but the love is fresh, so it's very ardent, it's very hot and everything. So when I come back from work, she would get a cup of coffee for me, would give me cookies, as for me to take a break first from my work. Because I come back to take a rest before dinner is ready. So she will do that. Illustration, okay. Just to do that. That is beginning, and she does it because of love. But as years goes on, after 30 years of having each other and everything, she still does the same thing. The question now, has it become a responsibility, or is the love relationship still there? You understand what I'm talking about? We need to check ourselves. If not, we slip into this subtlety of fulfilling a responsibility, and that relationship is no longer there. So the man has to be a man divinely called by God, who has a relationship, out of that relationship, carry out this responsibility. So it will not be for gains. We always think in terms of for gains means for money, not greedy for money. I know the Bible says that. If you do it for any other reason than a divine calling, you will also subtly want appreciation from people, a favor, a return, or everything you do. And therefore that relationship of shepherding the flock with God is very important. It starts with a relationship and then that responsibility. Don't get it the other way around. So he tells leader, yes, then now I want to move down to therefore, you see, the shepherd is not a CEO. He's a caretaker. He doesn't own everything, but because of that love, he does it with all his heart. And what is how he is to do it? The manner that he does it is to communicate. To communicate the love of God, and he don't command the people to do it. You see, some spiritual leaders command people to do it. In the marketplace, we need to be very careful. I appreciate my co-facilitator in FLN because he constantly texts with me. I constantly text with him in areas of our life. Because like he says, in the marketplace, He said they are so trained, alright, to use their authority to accomplish things, and they tend to do that in church. Their position. They may not be harsh, but they tend to use their authority. I'm given this position, therefore I have the right to do this kind of thinking. It's stewardship. It's not authority. It's not commanding. It's communicating. And he says, by being examples to the flock. We don't dictate. We don't tell people what to do. You guide. You show by your very own example. That's called servanthood leadership. If you keep doing that, you keep serving and you keep serving, ultimately people see that and they will serve. You have communicated that your love for Christ is so great, you just want to serve as Christ served. That is why it says they put the garment around his waist. Clothe yourself. You read that. Clothe yourself with humility. Clothe yourself. Why? Because Jesus clothed himself and washed the feet of the disciples. And herein we are talking about life examples. We have to urge. We don't always direct. We got to urge them to be a living testimony so that people are persuaded to follow. So the word here, what I'm trying to say is in verse 3, it says, not lording over those entrusted to you. The word is don't lord. Because I'm in this position, I have the right, and I have the right to directly and tell you what to do, and you need to follow. That's lording. Because you're using a position. And you need to look at the word entrusted. It is entrusted to you. It didn't belong to you. It's not given to you. Being examples of it all. So I want to ask ourselves this question. Every time when we perform something and we have instruct people to do things, and we exercise, let me use the word, just exercise leadership. Most of the time, what kind of leadership do we use? Here are some examples. You can use your title. I'm the pastor, I say so. You can use your seniority. I'm older, you see my white hair. You just listen to me. I can use my competence. I'm the expert in this field. Don't argue with me. I'm a musician, I know what is it and all that. What do we use to get people, or when we shepherd the people of God? We don't want to go down to the very negative example where people just say, I'm the one that contribute the most towards church, and therefore I should have the bigger say, or therefore I can say louder. When we lead, from what position do we lead? I'm not talking about status and everything. We should be leading from a relationship with Christ that is so intimate that the flock is precious, the flock is important to him, that he loves the flock and he wants the flock to grow. And unless we lead from that, we are leading from something else. And therefore Peter says, shepherd the flock. Not for gain, not for anything else, but actually what it is a relationship. We have talked about the man, we have talked about the manner it to be carried out, not commanding and everything, but by example, like example. Let's talk a little bit about the matter of it all. You see, we get derailed also. We can start with a relationship and we end up with a responsibility. So can we start the job well, our roles well, and we forget and then we do something else. So what are the roles really actually? What are the main job of a shepherd or spiritual leaders in It says, not only to communicate, it says here, it's a process of assessing. When you shepherd a flock, you are supposed to assess their health, where they are. All shepherds do that. You're supposed to protect them from dangers. If they're healthy and they are well, you still have to protect them from danger. You still have to lead them. You cannot just let them graze the grass all the time. You have to lead them to greener pastures. It is always to another fresher place, a greener place. And as you lead them on the journey, some sheep will go astray, some will run here, run there. You still got to grab them and bring them back to the main journey so that they can reach the destination. So I call it assessing, protecting, leading, guiding, and feeding them so that they remain healthy and strong. This is to know and take care of the health of the flock. That's the job of a shepherd. It is not an administrative job. It is not about administration. It is not about planning programs and events for the flock. You can plan programs and you can kill the flock. You can plan lots of events and you can kill the flock. In my mentoring group, which we met this week, we were talking about this pastor of Cross Point, a Baptist pastor, young Baptist pastor that led the church, grew the church to something like 7,000. And he came out one Sunday and he said, "This is my last day with you." He said, "I'm resigning. I resign, and in all integrity and in all honesty, we respect him for everything and all these things." And he says, "Simply because I've been running on empty." And he says, "This church cannot run on empty, and we have always built on that premise that everybody is valuable." That's called taking care of the flock. Making sure people don't run on empty, that their health, spiritual health is okay. Not planning programs, not doing a lot of administration, not running the church or maintaining the church. Not checking on the attendances of the programs and see how well it is. It is checking about how assessing what is the health of the flock, what is needed, what threatens the flock, where we are now, what are the things, what are the issues of society that threatens us. It's protecting us on it so that we teach about it. So that before people influence, they already get down. It is about this, assessing and then protecting them and then leading it. Leading them to so that they remain fresh. And ultimately, it means there will be some who will refuse or go haywire. It's still guiding them back and not giving up on that, and then feeding them so that they will grow strong and continue to grow and remain healthy. You don't eat a meal and don't eat anymore. So is the spiritual food. We don't come to a stage whereby we say, "I don't need spiritual food anymore. I need it, you need it." We must make sure that we are fed. So as Peter talks to them, he talks it very clearly. He says, "Shepherd God's flock." Shepherd God. Simple, but the implication is very, very... I summarize it here this way. When he talks to the flock, he says this: your responsibility is to proclaim the truth so as to build up the people and protect them against sin and error. Are we doing that? To shepherd a flock is to proclaim the truth, to build up the people and protect them against sin and error. And then he said, this is the role. So he talked about the man, the method, and the method. Then he turns to the flock, and he talks to the flock in verse 5. He starts off, of course, with the younger people. He says, young men, in the same way, be submissive to those who are older. All you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another. Why does he suddenly move and then don't say, the rest of you? He did But he didn't start with them. He just said, young men. And here, while I know commentators might differ, some say that it should be, when he said mention older men, is meaning elders. But I would suggest to you, it is not wrong to take it as young as the physical age and older men as the physical age also. Alright, so let me take it as a physical age. He says, young men, in the same way, be submissive to those who are older. You don't like this. We have a lot of young people here, you don't like this, you can't swallow it. I know it's difficult sometimes to challenging, and thoughts for me at your age, same thing also. Why should I do it? Why should I do it, especially if the leader is not a good leader, or the older, don't say leader, the older one is not as good. I think Peter addressed them to submit and to be humble, because let's admit it, the younger generation, right? Always, every young generation, it's not you. When I was young, I wish I was. When I was young, the same thing applied. Two things comes out very clearly of young generation. It's almost, we cannot escape it. Number one is pride. Number two is arrogance. It's just to the extent. What do you mean by pride? When I was young, now it didn't mean I was good, okay? When I was young, the pride in me was that I could do anything. I have a very high estimation of myself. I have, if you like, call an inflated view of myself. I don't like to do this job because I'm for a better job. My first job, I remember that I applied for. I told myself, temporary only, I will never do this job for my life, because you know what the job title is? I was not thinking about money. I was not thinking about anything at all. I was thinking about my esteem, although I said good to have some money. It was a general clerk in the Straits Times. I applied for that job. As I applied, I already told myself, I said, I will never be a general clerk. Who wants to be a clerk? And then this one, general clerk. Now, during my time, it's like that. I was thinking about engineer, I was thinking about doctor, I was thinking about this. So I have an inflated view of myself. You understand what I'm talking about? Every young generation has that. That is why it makes us ambitious also. That is why it makes us pushed. And it makes us go for things. So, Peter addressed, he says, young men, first learn to be submissive. So, first there is a pride, then there is the inflated view tend to make us push aside the counsel of wiser people. We listen, but we don't give due time. We don't go through it more. It is almost instantly when a counsel is given or advice is given to us, what do you know? Now, I don't know. I may be wrong with all of you. But that's true of me. And I have to learn through that hard way. And Proverbs clearly says, actually Proverbs is written for us. The whole book of Proverbs, you read it. I've been reading Proverbs. It's very interesting. You read it all. Actually, one of the purpose of Proverbs is to learn from life, learn lessons from life without going through the pain. Everything don't have to be experienced. Experience isn't everything, because most experiences are painful. And it's written for us, which means when Peter writes this, young men in the same way be submissive to those who are older. Now, why older? Why older? Because, number one, they have learned from their experience. They have gained from their mistakes. I have made mistakes I'm sure a lot of young people here haven't made. The intention is always good. I've made the mistake. Now, it doesn't mean you make mistake already, then now you can talk like a big deal. That is arrogance also of the older people. You make a mistake, you got to learn and you got to turn back. That is why that is called wisdom. The knowledge that you have made a mistake doesn't make you wise. What makes you wise is that you turn from there and get back on the right track. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. So it's not about making mistakes. It's about making mistakes and having learned from them. Now, that is why we always say the older people are a little bit slower. They are more discerning. Having made mistakes and everything, they are more discerning and they are not so rash. That's what Proverbs gives the reasons for. Why should young men submit to older? Why respect the older? Because they have made mistakes. They have turned back to God. And now they are more discerning. They are slower. They are more listening to people and to God also. And then the next thing is, of course, alright, because of all of that they have gained, they have remained faithful to God until today. So Peter is right. If you see an old man, and older people in this church here, respect them. Did they make mistake? Of course. Did they learn from a mistake? I pray so. And I'm sure. And they have remained faithful to God. So if the church is to grow and the church is to remain faithful to God, we got to learn from this old. So he just generally put it there. It's quite interesting. Peter didn't give any reason why you should. I am the one that have just given you because I read Proverbs. Okay? Peter just simply put it this way. Young men, in the same way, be submissive to those who are older. All of you clothe yourself with humility towards one another. Alright, I will pick up about one another later. But the second part of verse 5, he just simply go to the consequences. He said, because God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. He just mentioned the consequences. You want the reasons? You find it in Proverbs. Read Proverbs. He just gives the consequences. And I like it because I think he has a reason. He says, you know what, young man? Just submit. And if these old people are arrogant, if these old people are not right and everything, God will take care of it. That's why he said, God will oppose them. That's a strong word, you know. You don't have to oppose them. The more we want respect, the more we command respect, the higher the position of authority is. In this case, Peter was trying to tell the flock, give respect to the leaders. Give respect to your pastor. Give respect to these people who are at that time usually older people and everything. Give it. And if they are the one that is wrong, don't go and say fight it. Because God will oppose them. God will oppose the proud. And then he said, God will oppose the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Then of course you say, but very difficult like that. How to do and everything. That's what you call the grace of God. You have to pray. You have to pray for them. You have to pray for yourself. Say, God, give me grace to submit. I can't submit. It's not only about older and younger. Every area also, we usually have to pray for grace. Sometimes we can't forgive. We ask God, give me the grace to forgive. So God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now let me pick up from where I left in verse 5. He says, all of you clothe yourself with humility towards one another. It straight away reminds us about the Lord's Supper where Jesus took off his garment, wrapped around his waist, and went one by one to wash. He clothed himself to serve. He said, all of you. And he used the word one another. A word, I think this word was taken to be for the older generation. Yes, while Peter tells the younger generation, submit. I think the word is mutual humility. Mutual humility. I was taught this in my mentoring class. It says, don't always talk about your successes in the past. Talk about where you have failed and what you have learned. Said older people learn not only to talk about your failures. Hey, you know, that one, you do like that, you get into trouble. No, I got into trouble like that before. Don't just talk like that. That is a little bit of an arrogance. Talk about your pain. Talk about your struggle. Talk about Whether you are able to overcome today or not, the same thing. Talk about that. From what we call from a point of weakness. That's called mutual humility. Learning from one another. I tried to find out what is the best way to communicate with the generation younger than us. I don't think there's an answer. But I gleaned some things from Jia Yong here and there. I mean, we always say young people don't like us to tell them what to do. If they don't like us to tell them to do it, and we need to tell them what to do, and it's important, and all, then how do we do it and all that? I think if we talk to the younger generation and ask them, then what is the way to approach? We will learn, and that there are ways to do that. It is not impossible. I realize that it is not impossible. Anyway, we need to work on mutual humility. Then in verse 8 to 10 all the way. Now generally he's talking about everybody. He had started off with the elders, the spiritual leaders, then he talks about the flock. And then now he talks about all of us together in verse 8 to 10. He reminds us, look, in case there is suffering and in case there is problem and we are blaming one another, remember it is the enemy. We have a common enemy. It is the lion. Satan is our common enemy. It is not you or me. And his way of doing things is to bring dissension and bring discouragement and bring things, especially in difficult times, into the church. A church seldom split during good times. A church always split during difficult times. That's why I use this term, shining through suffering as a body, not individual. You can go and you can shine as an individual through suffering, but that's you alone. But as a body, it's challenging. It is challenging. The enemy subtly comes, and therefore he addresses this and he put this, be self-controlled and alert. All of us got to do that, not only one. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith. Because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of suffering. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. But before that happens, what are some of the traps of the enemy? How does he roar? He roars most often when there's persecution, when there is suffering in your life. That's how the lion roars, the enemy. He roars, he makes it so difficult life for you. He makes you go through persecution and everything. He brings suffering. That's one way he roars. And that's the time when we need to be self-controlled, alert, and we need to stand firm in the faith. So the church was having difficulties at that time. Everybody was scattered. Some churches already scattered. So Peter writes to them and said, as an encouragement, don't worry, stay firm. It's the enemy that is working through the Roman Empire. It's the enemy that is working there. Another way is, besides difficulty, is distraction. You know, the enemy roars very loudly through distraction. If he can get the church to be distracted in what they should be doing, can get the leaders distracted in what they should be doing, and the church and the way they handle it, then we are in for trouble. I think that's the reason, is my inference, that's the reason Peter writes clearly, shepherd God's flock. And that's why I put in, it should be assessing, it should be guiding them, it should be leading them. That's the job. It is not programs, it's people, it's the flock. It's the health of the flock. So churches can grow big, they can start with a heart. But then in the end, they think their responsibility is to plan programs, and run the church well. Except for the honesty of this pastor, Crosspoint Church, Baptist Church, that he said, I've been running on empty for some time. Except for his integrity, he says, I resign. It's not like take a break. I resign. I need to recoup completely. I do not know, but the thought that came to my mind, was he distracted at the end? I'm in no position to judge that. But I'm glad at least he noticed that he cannot remain distracted when he's running on empty. It's going back to a relationship. It's not responsibility anymore. So we have difficulties, we have distraction, and then when distraction comes, the next one is discouragement. Discouragement will always result when there is difficulties and when there is distraction. Then you get discouraged, and everybody discouraged, and then when you get discouraged, what is going to happen? There's going to be discord or dissension. You start blaming this, blame the leaders blame you, and things like that, and we blame each other. The end result is that we all get dispersed. We get scattered all over the way. And therefore, Peter felt that he needs to write to this church that is undergoing persecution, that is suffering for their faith, everything, and he says, don't give up. Stick to your roles. Stick together, be united together. You will get through it. Why do I say you will get through it? You look at the words. After you have suffered a little while. He says Christ himself will restore you. We will be restored. We will not always be in the same state. Difficulties must come to an end. That's our hope. You know that. There will always be an end to difficulty. It cannot last forever. It can last long, yes, but it cannot last forever. So don't give up hope. We will be restored. There will be greater days. And then he says, it's not only about greatest days. He says, what is that? The result that you come out of it. You will not only be restored, you will be strengthened, you'll be strong, you'll be firm, you'll be steadfast. And it all comes. Not because we say we will be strong or anything. He says, if we put our faith in Christ, who called us to eternal glory. He called us as a church. He called us his flock. He divinely called people who are called divinely to shepherd the flock. The flock is precious to him, important to him. And in times of difficulties, it is a time we need to stick together. In times of persecution, we need to stick together. We need to examine ourselves. We are not in difficulties, we are not in tough times or anything right now, or anything maybe. But we need to examine ourselves, our roles. We need to examine our roles as leaders. We need to examine our roles as flock. And then we need to put our eyes on a higher plane. That this is not always like that. One of the worst things, and we talk about discouragement and everything, Satan uses discouragement. It's very often we say, it's one of his most effective tools. It's like, no more hope already lah. We'll be like that forever. And that's the end of it. If we are here, catch ourselves saying that, we need to snap out of that. And say there's a higher plane. There's a higher plane. I like this passage because I think Peter put it down very clearly, very bluntly, everything. Not for gains, not for favors, not because you must. I like it because he puts down so plainly and so clearly. He says there is a chief shepherd that will come. So it's not about our efforts. It's about Christ looking over us. that we are His flock. And He will definitely look after us. I hope that will cause us to look to a higher plane and play our roles carefully. Let us pray.